Dr. Jarik Conrad is an amazing person. Not only is he the author of In Search of Humanity that we're going to talk about today, but he is intelligent, optimistic, and a visionary. And I love all of those things about him. Dr. Conrad believes in and appeals to the best of humanity. He's realistic in that he's aware of the problems we have, but he's optimistic in that he believes there are solutions and reachable solutions. And he provides many of those solutions. I know you are going to enjoy this great discussion with Dr. Jarik Conrad, the mindful leader. Dr. Jarik Conrad is the Vice President of the Human Insights team at UKG, which consists of former HR practitioners, business leaders, and consultants who are distinguished experts in the human capital management field and uniquely, if I can say that, qualified to help leadership teams reach their organizational goals. He also serves as the Executive Director of the Workforce Institute at UKG. Prior to UKG, Dr. Conrad spent more than 20 years in HR leadership roles in various sectors. He is a sought-after speaker. He is also recognized as one of the world's top people practitioners, as well as a top HR influencer. Dr. Conrad is the author of the best-selling books, The Fragile Mind, How It Has Produced and Unwittingly Perpetrates America's Top Tragic Disparities, and his latest book that we're going to talk about today, In Search of Humanity, Why We Fight, How to Stop, and the Role Business Must Play. Dr. Conrad, who grew up in public housing in East St. Louis, which back in my musician days, Dr. Conrad, I had a band and we played in East St. Louis.
That's all right.
That's right. He grew up in East St. Louis, earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois, two master's degrees from Cornell University, and a doctor of education from the University of North Florida. He joined us today from beautiful San Diego. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm well. It's beautiful here today for sure. I'm lucky.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're a busy guy. You have a lot going on, so I really appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to have this discussion.
Me too. You and I got to know each other a little bit back when I was at American Fidelity on the HR team there. We brought you in to do some consulting and a talk with us. We had I always try to remember, it's been a couple of years now, the name of it. It was a leadership summit. And we brought you in to do some DEI talk with us for one of those events. And that's where I met you and got to know you. And your book was coming out, I think shortly after that.
Yeah, I think I was working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just very impressed with you at the time and was looking forward to do something else with you. And now we have the podcast and we can talk about the book. So I'm just very impressed with you. But we read your bio, but tell everybody a little bit about you and how you came up and how you got here. You grew up in East St. Louis and
yeah. Sometimes, when I hear people read the bio, I'm just like, it's all the stuff my mother would say about me. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess, as it relates to what I write about, what I talk about, kind of a passion of mine, East St. Louis is still something important. In many ways, I'm still that little boy growing up in the projects in East St. Louis. So I kind of see the world through that lens. I remember what that's like. And I know there's so many other people, whether it's East St. Louis or, other cities in America and really globally that, are struggling. And so I always, think about those folks and I'm on this constant mission to try to change the situation so that, more people don't have to be born into this situation where people think, because you're born here, this is where you're going to be, and your destiny is already decided for you. I rejected that then, I reject that now, and I'm trying to change the future for as many people as I can, if I can.
Yeah. Then you've had a very successful career. You've worked for some Fortune 500 companies. You've been in HR. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I started, I'm one of those rare HR professionals that wanted to be in HR. Like this is what I studied, but I didn't start off that way. I went to college. I went to Illinois on an engineering scholarship. Everybody thought this is what I should do. Was good in math and science and all that stuff. And it wasn't until the third year at Illinois when I was like, I just don't think this is what I want to do. And it's funny, this was my fourth internship because I did an internship right out of high school with McDonnell Douglas, which is Boeing now. And I was enjoying the internships, which really probably kept me in engineering for so long. But it was a conversation with the HR professional. I was doing kind of this exit interview in this last internship before I go and graduate and then come work for them full time. And it was in that meeting when I was like, I don't think I want to be an engineer. Now it took a lot of courage because this is going to be my job, right? But he laughed at me and he left the room. And I'm like, what have I done? I mean, what is my future going to be like? He just laughed at me. He came back with a folder, which happened to be from the University of Illinois, where I was, their School of Industrial and Labor Relations. He's like, Jarik, I laughed at you because you just remind me of myself. So he went to his car and got that folder. And he said, man, I think you should look at HR. I think you'd be an excellent HR professional. Just research it, and let me know. And so I did. I went back to school. Met with the people over there, started to find out more about what HR was. It wasn't just hiring people, firing people, which is all I thought it was.
Right.
And that started that whole process. So I changed my major and started applying to graduate schools. And that's why I went to Cornell for HR. So this is kind of what I wanted to do. I've been in and around HR ever since. Now, while I was there, I got a business degree because the knock on HR people at the time was that they didn't have business acumen. Well, there's still a knock on HR people today. So as much as things change, they kind of stay the same. I think our profession has grown a lot. We have gotten to be much more sophisticated as a function, but I think there's still some opportunity for us to do even more. But that's kind of how I chose that. And I went to Citibank in an HR management associate program. And, I was all over the country. I was in Chicago and Stamford, Connecticut. I did my last rotation in Dublin, Ireland, which was, I'm going from East St. Louis to Ireland, which was just a wonderful experience and just triggered a lot of things in me about just diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and trying to understand all this stuff, and that has been a kind of a underlying theme throughout my experience as well. The whole diversity piece and trying to solve that puzzle.
Yeah, that's a great story. Well, you've had a fantastic career, and then you've written a couple books, and I'm excited to talk to you about this book, In Search of Humanity. It is an outstanding book, and you're a great researcher and you're a great writer, and I really hope everybody goes out and gets this book, because we're just going to scratch the surface here today as we talk. But I want to get rolling and dig into this with you because I have so much to talk to you about. I feel like we could talk.
Let's see. Look, I haven't read that book in a long time. Let's see if I remember what I wrote.
Well, there's a lot of tough stuff in this book, but I love the way you started out. Even in the introduction, you start out very optimistically. You start and end optimistically. And on page 2, you say there are 2 clear options for America to bring a firm conclusion to its civil war: find a common enemy to gang up on, or unite around a common goal. And I vote for the second option. Yeah. So kind of tell us about, that idea and why you wrote this book.
Yeah, I think, first, I believe that we're in the midst of a civil war to some degree. Now, people think that's hyperbolic to say that, but when you got factions, of hate And you have some violence associated with that. So there's some spikes of heat in this cold civil war that we're experiencing. And it's only gotten worse in many respects since I wrote the book. So first, I think people need to step back and recognize how serious this is when you have some of your citizens that feel threatened, whether they're, Black people, whether they're members of the LGBTQ plus community, or, whatever the group is. This is serious, and it's going to impact, as an employer, it's absolutely going to impact your employees. The people who come to work for you, they're not just workers, they're citizens, and they're living with all of this as a backdrop. So that, all that's really critically important. And for me, I can't see, I can only see two options, if we're going to get out of this. Usually we can't continue to have a civil war. We can't have groups pitted against each other. So typically you either have to say, well, let's forget about the beef that we have with each other. We hate this person more. And so let's go after them. But I think that's equally problematic. We're in a global society. We can't just pick, a country, deem them the enemy, or pick, an industry, deem that industry the enemy, or whatever it is. I just don't think that's a positive thing. But this idea about uniting around a common goal, I think we're uniquely positioned as a country to do that. If you look at our customs and our traditions and what at least we write about who we are, all men are created equal, or men and women should have been, are created equal. And, everybody has this, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, all that stuff. You listen to the words of the Pledge of Allegiance, and you listen to all of our symbols. Look at all our symbols and listen to, all our rituals and ceremonies. It's a perfect backdrop. If we really believe all that stuff, that is the uniting thread that we have. Diversity then becomes a strength for us, not, this source of, aggression and division and all of that. So I'm appealing to people to see our shared humanity and recognize you're just a different version of me, as opposed to you're someone else. And if we can put those things that we wrote about, the promises that we made, if we can put that stuff into action, man, I think we have a tremendous opportunity in the United States.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I love that it's appealing to our higher ideas rather than the combat mentality.
Yeah,
And speaking of combat mentality, chapter 1, you talk about tribalism, violence, and fear, and how that's in us. To describe that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is that, you will hear most organizations saying, we want to create a more human workplace. We want to bring humanity, but they're not telling a whole story, because, human beings, we're capable of astonishing, kindness and empathy, all these wonderful things, which is what they're talking about. But we're also capable of some violence and hate and, destruction. And, we got to understand that and to try to figure out where all that comes from. So tribalism, for example, is an example of the traits and characteristics that we have that are probably most responsible for us still being here today. Like, the early humans wouldn't have survived without being able to form tribes. This is how Homo sapiens overcame Neanderthals. Yeah, we got to be able to form tribes and bond. From a practical standpoint, if you're on the African savannas in the early days of human beings, and you got this animal, saber-toothed tigers chasing you, are you better off running off on your own, or are you better off running in a group of people? You better run in that group of people if you're trying to survive. Right. Your probability of success becomes much greater if you're running with that group of people. So tribalism has been a necessary part of what it means to be human. And then there's something magic about it. I mean, we love to connect with people, right? We love it when people have some shared experiences. And it could be something as simple as a baseball team. You mentioned I'm from East St. Louis. I'm a big St. Louis Cardinal fan,
Right.
even though they're in last place this year, but I'm a Cardinal fan. So wherever I'm traveling in the country or all over the world, if I see a Cardinal hat, that's somebody in my tribe, at least one of my tribes. And so I reach out, hey, nice hat. Hey, how you doing? You from St. Louis? There's this human desire to have that shared connection. And that's part of what, tribalism is all about. There's a beautiful piece associated with that shared experience that we have. But you can see there's a flip side. And it's tribalism that sometimes leads people to hate. And, if you're in this other group, then you're not as good as us. So this whole issue of otherness. So that is just one example of how, the same skills that got us here are the ones that are getting us into trouble. So I feel, David, in many ways, we're at this crossroads, and we're trying to navigate this modern society with those skills. And technology is moving faster than our ability to keep up with it, or at least to keep up with it responsibly. So we can make social media where you can have instant access to information with anybody all over the world, but are we capable of handling it responsibly? And the jury is still out on that. We have a lot of people who are heavy social media users experience anxiety, depression, there's been violence and bullying and, all kinds of stuff associated with that. So that's where we are. I think we're at this crossroads, and fear is a healthy thing. If the alarm in my house goes off right now, my amygdala is going to respond, right? I'm going to have one of three responses, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. That's who we are now. That's who we've always been. We haven't changed that much in terms of fundamentally who we are. And sometimes I need to be able to just get out of fear. That I need the adrenaline to take me somewhere before I have time to really figure it out from an intellectual standpoint. And so that fear mechanism is partly responsible for survival. But again, if we fear somebody, we may feel like we need to dominate them. So they may come to take what we have, so fears, two sides of the coin with that. And then I think curiosity, I'm a little concerned about curiosity. I think it's such an important part of what it means to be human, to be curious, to want to figure things out, to want to go to net. That's how you advance. Yet we're making things so convenient for people that they have to do such little work. I mean, we have just all the power in our, the more convenient we make everything, the less work we have to do. What is that doing for our curiosity? Again, I think we have to see long-term what that's going to mean for human ingenuity. But yeah, we're not that different than we were in those early days, but the world around us is vastly different.
Yeah. So that tribalism and the fear that happens around that really, I think, brings us into chapter 2, which has to do with American exceptionalism. So we in America, we have our tribe. We're America, and we've really done a great job over the years of selling the idea that America is an exceptional place. There's no lack of pride in America, and everybody around the world knows that we Americans believe it is the greatest place in the world, in the universe. There's nothing better than America.
Yeah.
And we have a hard time as Americans reflecting that maybe we've stumbled here and there, and looking back and maybe there's some flaws in our history. And in chapter 2, you examine some of those flaws. And I want to look at, we could spend more than an hour going through chapter 2 and looking at some of this. Before I ask you about some of these specifically, what would you say just generally about that idea?
Yeah, it's this is the tough part of the book. This is the hard part for people to read. I even had people While they were reading the earlier versions of this, they told me they just had to put it down. They can only read a little bit and then they have to put it down and they reflect on what they were reading. I just think it's critically important. And this is relevant for what's going on in society now, where we're taking things out of history books. We're proclaiming we can't talk about this because it makes people feel bad. Look, we gotta be able to talk about this. To me, it is a sign of strength to be able to look back and say, look, we've had some missteps and stumbles, but we're going to fix it. We're going to be different in the future. That to me is a sign of security. It's like a manager in corporate America. If a manager is afraid to be vulnerable and show that they've made some mistakes, they're just not going to be that great, over time, right? We got to admit that I'm so confident in who I am and the contributions that I make that I can admit to some missteps, and I can try to rectify those so we can be even better. So we gotta do that as a country. I mean, there's history that people just don't even know. I mean, we know the basics, but there's a lot of stuff that people don't even know, and more importantly, they don't understand how those historical occurrences are affecting us today. And that's the part where people, slavery was a long time ago. Civil rights era, that stuff was a long time ago. What about it? We're still living with the impact. Think about redlining and how our neighborhoods, got populated. I mean, we're largely still segregated along those lines that was government sanctioned redlining back in the day. It wasn't about your merit. If you were Black, you just couldn't live in certain neighborhoods, even if you could afford to. If you got the GI Bill and had a loan, and that you couldn't even use that stuff because you were not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods. So
even though you served in the war, even though you served in the war and
even though you served
paid the price, you were not allowed.
Yeah. And on paper, it said you qualified, but in practice, you couldn't qualify. And that was both in housing and in education. So a lot of people don't understand that. They don't know about that GI Bill after World War II and the impact that it had on people. And again, we're still living with that. And so I think it's really important. And it's not about making excuses. It's about acknowledging the obvious. It's about acknowledging the data. This is what we know to be true. I don't understand how people can turn a blind eye, especially when it's impacting us today. And it costs us more. To me, when you think about what it costs to put together safety net programs for people who are struggling, man, there's a lot of money that goes from a government standpoint to those programs. And maybe we can do some things up front that will cost us as a society, a lot less. There have been studies about the return on that. I mean, the cost of inequality is high for all of us. So, I just think that, the history is important. And I think there's some interesting things to note about the history, too. If you go back to slavery, all white people, they owned slaves. And so, your ancestors might have been abolitionists. They might have been people fighting against that. Right. So, we don't know that. The other thing is that we're not responsible. When it relates to culture, I have really mixed emotions. It's something I call the pride and pearls of culture. I talked about making those connections with people or shared experiences. That's part of what culture is. We got a shared language. We have shared experiences. We have something in common. There's something that feeds the soul associated with that. On the other hand, we make a lot of bad decisions because this is what we do. You know what I mean? We make a lot of bad decisions because we're trying to preserve this culture, even if it's not working for us. So I think we got to really evaluate, all of that. And I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to eat. The example I use for people all the time is Black people, we historically ate some scraps because that's all we could afford. That's all we, right. Still today, even if we can afford better, some of us still eat those scraps because that's how grandma made it and that's how her grandma made it.
Right.
But it's causing heart disease and diabetes. And, why are we still eating that then?
Right.
What? Because we want this connection to culture. I'm not going to sacrifice myself and my health to try to make this connection to culture. You can't take my black card because I won't eat chitlin. We call them chitterlings.
Right.
You can't take my. So we got to evaluate that as individuals and as a society. And we got to be able to look back as, Americans. All of us are hyphenated Americans.
Right.
We got to look back at, who we are, how we arrived here, what the experiences were, and how do those impact us today? Let alone, I can give you study after study, whether it's home buying and mortgage lending or healthcare treatment by doctors,
Right.
whether it's grades in school, whether it's whatever the subject is. I can show you today dozens of studies that show we're still discriminated against. We still have bias and adverse outcomes. Even if you take away all that history, we're still dealing with the impact of this stuff today. So you combine the historical stuff with the stuff that's happening today, it's easy to see why, Black people in particular experience so many disparities.
Yeah. This chapter is so powerful because you go through history and you show example after example after example after example after example after example. We go through Christopher Columbus, what a tragic example, and we celebrate Columbus Day. Of course, now they're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think a positive move. You go through how in 1619 we had the first slave ship, the first slave people who came over. You talk about on page 34, I think this is a powerful quote. You say, "The irony of the American Revolution is that Americans fought for the ideals of freedom, independence, and their right to claim land, while simultaneously raiding native lands and holding Africans as slaves."
We just have to deal with that. We just have to deal with that. Now we got to be adult about that and say, look, all of us, our ancestors, there were some positive things that they did and some negative things that they did.
That's why I don't understand why people can't just acknowledge that. There were some fantastic things they did. There were also some really awful things they did.
Yeah, we just got to deal with that and not look. I have not done the 23andMe and all that stuff, and my daughter wants me to do it. So at some point we'll do it. But for me, if I find out, to me that stuff is so convenient. Like we'll find out I have a great grandfather that was the first educator in this particular city or so and so. That explains why education is so important to me. Your great grandfather had 8 siblings. 7 of them might have been axe murderers. You can't take the one and claim him and not claim those 7. You're not responsible for the axe murderers, and you can't claim responsibility for him being successful. All of us have good and bad in our background. People all over the world have committed atrocities, against other people. And we just need to deal with, again, the reason it's important for us to talk about ours is because of the legacy of it, the continuing impact of it. And how do we rectify it? And how do we use it as a source of pride? What if we acknowledge this stuff and put in structures and processes to overcome these disparities that are a result of all this stuff? What kind of success story is that for America? I mean, to me, you talk about honoring the forefathers, and what if this really could become all the stuff that we say it is?
Right.
we have a tremendous opportunity that we're squandering.
Yeah. You talked about legacy. Let's use a specific example. Someone I know you know very well. Let's talk about Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, because I was from Jackson, because I lived in Jacksonville for so long.
You served in Jacksonville as the HR director of the city government there.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, so without going too much into one particular character or not, or one particular historical figure, all accounts I read about him, he was a tough person and really not kind to people who look like me. It's not something people accused him of. It's stuff that he said. He was pretty open about who he was and what his intent was, for our country, what his intent was for people who look like me. We can acknowledge that.
People, the Indian Removal Act. I mean, yeah.
The Indian Removal Act. I mean, look what he did to Native Americans, and I talk a lot about this in the book, just the incredibly cruel things that were done to Native Americans, and we don't talk about enough today. It just doesn't come up because there's so few Native Americans now, that we work with on a day-to-day basis that is not top of mind. But I mean, this stuff is part of our history, and we need to understand it. So we got to acknowledge who this person was, and this was a president. I don't see how being dishonest or disingenuous about who he was and what he did, how that hurts us in any way. I think acknowledging that makes us stronger, and we just got to commit to not reliving any of that stuff.
And we have statues of Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, and here's the deal. You got to acknowledge if somebody who was a president, that's a historical figure, you got to put them at least in museums and all that stuff. But in some ways in a country, we don't talk as much about the statues anymore. I think a lot of cities have made decisions and they've done what they've done. But again, the emotion that's tied up into a statue of somebody who, at least for part of their lives, demonstrated hate. And knowing that many of those statues were erected at not the time where those people lived to honor them, but really during Reconstruction to say, look, we're going to, don't forget who we are. We're going to remind you of who we are.
I think that's a key point.
Incredible.
When a lot of these statues were erected, I think that's a key point.
I mean, again, some of the people who funded those statues, they were clear about why they were funding them. We don't have to guess about it. They told you what it was. We just get we deal with a level of emotional incompetence because of all the stuff that's going on. I mean, as an adult, we ought to be able to deal with that. It's not changing history. People say, well, you're changing history. You can't change it. It happened. You're just not glorifying it. You're trying to correct it. You're trying to put it in its proper perspective. Was it right to erect the statue of a slave owner to glorify them, where Black people have to walk by this thing every day and be reminded of that whole power dynamic? Is that right? Would that be the right thing to do today? If it wouldn't be the right thing to do today, why wouldn't we make some changes? And again, whether it's a museum or the history books and all that, you got to talk about those people. But I don't understand why you would glorify those people.
Right. And these systemic things happened not just back then, but then all through the 50s, the 60s, all of these, it just continued and continued.
Yeah.
We get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is called The Modern Myth of Meritocracy. Explain to us what meritocracy means and why it's a myth.
So it's this idea that, look, whoever's the smartest, the brightest, the strongest, the fastest, the most intelligent, those people are going to be successful compared to everybody else. We all have a fair shot. The cream will rise to the top. And it is, we fall in love with that idea. I mean, I think everybody can relate to that to some degree. We feel like that seems appropriate. That seems fair. But then you get into the reality of it, and you know that that's not how we were created. That's not how, societies are typically created. I present some data in the book. The biggest factor that would determine, how successful we're going to be is the family that we're born into and the situation that we're born into.
Yeah. Page 67. You say Heckman described it. The accident of birth is the greatest source of inequality in America today. Children born into disadvantage are, by the time they start kindergarten, already at risk of dropping out of school, teen pregnancy, crime, and a lifetime of low-wage work. Then you say, wealth breeds wealth and poverty breeds poverty.
Simple. I mean, emotionally, people say, well, I worked hard, I so and so. And that's the thing. But listen, there are some examples of people overcoming insurmountable odds to be successful. I mean, people point to me like, Jarik, you came out of East St. Louis. That proves all you got to do is work hard, so and so.
All it takes is just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah.
If that's the case, I can give you an example of somebody who has, a paraplegic who competed in an Ironman.
Right.
Does that mean we should say, look, stop whining, that you have these issues? I know a paraplegic who was in the Ironman. If they can be in the Ironman, then you can be in the Ironman too. No, that would be ridiculous. That would be an extreme case. That would be an outlier. And something about our emotions attach to outliers, because it feels good. We write movies about them. We tell these stories because
that's why they're in the movies, because they're outliers.
That's why they're in the movie. It wouldn't be movie worthy if it happened all the time. We can't go by the few who did incredibly well, the few who did incredibly poor. We got to go by what happens to most people. And these patterns are clear. Now, I won't remember these numbers off the top of my head, but if you think about people born in a bottom quartile of income in America, I think it's like 6% or something like that make it to the top quartile in their lifetime. And people who are born in the top quartile is like 8% end up in the bottom quartile. So that means 90-something% of the people end up in the quartile that they're born into. You telling me that none of those people are really smart, really intelligent? None of those people at the top are really, not so smart, not so intelligent. I mean, obviously, resources matter. Resources enable me to get the training that I need, to get the coaching that I need, to get the tools that I need to hone whatever the skill is to maximize my potential. I already have money. I can invest in other things that could be a boom or bust. If it's a boom, I do really well. And, obviously resources matter. If that were the case, wealthy people wouldn't bother sending their kids to private schools versus public schools. Like,
right.
You must think it gives them an advantage because you keep doing it, right? And you say, I'm doing it to give them the best chance. But at the end of the day, when they're successful, you say it was all on them. But you said you did this to give them the best chance. So in poverty, when you're poor, you end up, I'm gonna buy some lottery tickets with this last $5 because I can't do anything with it anyway. And if I can potentially win millions of dollars, and so you end up making riskier decisions when you're just, you're in this vulnerable situation. You don't have the coaching, you don't have the consulting, you don't have the resources, you don't have test prep. You don't have a parent that went to the Ivy League school so you can get the chance to go just on legacy status, even though your scores might not be as good as they could be. I mean, this is just, obvious.
Right.
And, we just got to be honest about that. I'm not saying intelligence, talent, hard work, and all that stuff is not important. I'm saying you can have all that and be born in terrible circumstances and just not make it. Or you can have very little of that and be born in terrific circumstances and do very well. And it proves itself over and over again.
And that brings us to your model of self-sustaining outcomes. And this is one of the things when I first met you that I remember you had developed, and this stood out to me. Tell us about that.
Yeah, man, I haven't looked at this. You might have to keep me honest on this one. I haven't looked at this in a while, but I will, without going into every detail of the model, I will say this: it's almost like this country club, kind of thing. That when you're at the highest levels of the club, you have a certain life experience. When you're rich or when you prestige, people give you stuff. You're a celebrity. They say, "Hey, wear my necklace on TV for free," because if you got it on, that means it's valuable and other people might buy it. So it's really counterintuitive. Rich people get stuff for free because people just want to be associated with them. And there's this membership in this status that they have. Then you go to this next level. So I think I have, wealthy whites at that top level.
Wealthy whites, right? Yeah.
And then you go to this next level, and you got, kind of
middle class and poor whites. Yeah.
You got the middle class, whites right there in that level. And what's interesting, if you're talking about race in America, if you're a white male, if you talk about race and gender, if you're a white male, you might not like this term privilege. And I don't use the term a lot, and that's why I created this model to kind of explain what people mean with privilege. But if you're a white male, you feel like I'm out here competing every day. I'm trying to work hard. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that because I'm working. The reality is you at least got to compete against the other white males, right? And so you don't recognize that there's some people not even in the game. They're not even getting a chance to compete because they're not getting the benefit of the doubt. So at the top levels, you kind of get the benefit of the doubt. If you're a white male and you walk into a room and you say, "I own an IT company," people are like, "Okay, he probably owns an IT company." I've seen people who look like him own IT companies, so that makes sense. If you walk in and you're a woman and you say, "I own an IT company," really, what's the name of the company? People might question that a little bit. If you walk in as a Black person, "I own an IT company," really? Well, what's the name of the company? Well, what? Because I haven't seen that. And so you don't get the same level of the benefit of the doubt with that. So you got the wealthy whites, you got the middle class whites, and then you got actually the lower income whites before you get to wealthy Blacks. It's like, wait a minute. Why is that? Why does he have lower income whites on a scale higher than wealthy Black people? Well, here is the deal. I'm living here in this gated community in California. I got all these degrees and Dr. Jarik Conrad. If I go out to, run an errand at a store or go to the gym or something, and I got on some workout clothes, when people see me, if they have an image of Black people, if they have biases, if they have, if they're racist at all, if they are scared or whatever it is they're feeling, if they have this emotional, issue related to Black people, they're going to pass that on to me because I'm not walking around showing my degrees. I'm a Black person. I'm not Dr. Conrad to them. They're going to have the same stereotype for me as they do any other Black person. If you're white, you can be poor, you can be barely making it, but if you had the same suit I had on and we walked in a room, the assumptions about you would be different than the assumptions about me. That's why it's hard to separate race and class, but if you are a wealthy Black person and you're encountering people who hate, you're at risk despite your hard work, despite your merit, despite all this stuff. You're looked at as just part of that group. You don't show your class level on your face. So that's kind of the difference. I was trying to explain with that model. You could be a member of the club potentially, but there's going to be more scrutiny associated with you getting in this club.
Yeah. A great example of that is a video. I love TikTok, and there's a video of this guy he's a black guy. He lives in this affluent community, and he goes out to the lake and he fishes. And he just keeps showing these videos. Every time he goes out and fishes, somebody from the community comes up and says, you're not supposed to fish here. Only people who live here are supposed to fish. And he just films it every time. He's like, I live in this community, but every time I fish here, somebody comes up. They call the police on him. He videos it when the police show up because he's like, they assume I don't live here because I'm a black guy fishing at the thing. So he's like on that third tier. He's a wealthy black guy, but just because he's black, they assume he doesn't live there.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we have so many examples of that. How do we have people saying racism doesn't exist in our country?
Right.
Racism doesn't matter. All you got to do is work hard. I mean, why can't we just accept? You're not the person who did it. So why are you defending the people who did it to him? Why are you coming to their aid instead of coming to his aid? And furthermore, people get mad at him for posting. All they do is whining and complaining. They playing the victim, and I'm so tired of them playing the victim. It's so fascinating. So, and when he called somebody who probably called the police on him, if he called them racist, some of them would go berserk. You're racist for calling me racist. Even though I just did this racist thing.
Yeah. When we're saying, I'm just protecting the neighborhood from people who shouldn't be here. It's not because you're black. I'd do it if anybody was here.
That's right. And just ask the police officer, okay, tell me the last time you were called here for a white person fishing.
Right. Yeah.
It's fascinating, man. And again, the issue is not with the people who hate and who are just out there. I just hate you because you look different. There are going to be some of those people, and I don't know how you turn them around. Sometimes they do, but I don't know. The issue is with the people who are looking the other way, who are making excuses for them. Oh, they didn't do it because they're racist. They did. How do you know? Like, why are you jumping to their defense like that when all the evidence suggests one thing, you refuse to accept that thing, and the person who pointed out the evidence is the enemy?
Right.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Oh, we're running out of time. I knew I was going to need to. Okay. Chapter 4. I want to read this because the chapter title, I don't even know if I can pronounce. You talk about from Homo sapiens to Miserator hominibus. So I'll just read this to explain it. You say, empathy must be at the core of a new society. We must evolve from wise men, Homo sapiens, to compassionate people. I don't know how to say the Latin. Miserator hominibus. Am I getting that?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Our institutions must be reimagined and re-engineered to ensure every person is treated with respect and care. Each life must be valued equally. A black child born into poverty in East St. Louis must have the same value as a white child born into wealth in Bel Air. Children do not choose their parents, their sex assigned at birth, their skin color, their economic class, or their religion. Yet these conditions indelibly mark their fate. When I read this, I thought two things. First, I totally agreed that is where we need to go as a society. Also, I feel like Dr. Conrad's a little optimistic here. So we'll get here in just a second to some of your proposals of how we get there, but talk to me. Why are you optimistic about one? I agree we need to get there, but why are you optimistic that we can do this?
I have to be. I have kids. I have kids, and God willing, they'll have kids, and I gotta feel like we can get there. Again, human beings have demonstrated a remarkable ability to have compassion and kindness and all that. And I think it's within a lot of people. I think we just have to find out, you got to figure out how to get to them and to clear out some of this noise. But I hope it's possible. I think that we got to take control of our own evolution. We can't wait 1,000 years for this to happen. We got to decide, what are we going to value as a person, as my family, as a country? what are we going to value? And at the end of the day, it's going to help all of us. I mean, if America can get some people from off the sidelines who are just not included right now, not even in the game right now, all this talent that has been squandered, if they could get in the game, just think about what we can accomplish as a country. I mean, we're just leaving a lot of talent just sitting there on the table. So that's my attempt to say, look, we can't wait on it to happen.
Yeah.
We got to chart our own destiny, but we're going to have to change. We're going to have to value those human traits that are, positive and uplifting and connecting and enabling and all that, as opposed to the confrontational and the conflict. Right. And we got to look at tribalism differently. I mean, you might be like me, a fan of the Olympics. And one thing is really interesting about Olympic athletes. Countries could be at war and all that stuff, but those athletes respect each other. And you can have these countries, there's this bitter war. They're competing against each other. And one of those athletes trips and falls. This athlete might stop and help them up.
Right.
And let's go. So I want to compete with you, but I don't want to demolish you. I don't want to destroy you. I want you to be good. I just want to be a little bit better, but I want you to be good. I wish we can adopt that from from an American standpoint. I wish we can adopt that as our way of life, like the Olympics, like we're pulling for each other. Even if as a country, we still want to be, this exceptional kind of country. How can we do that but making the world, I hate to sound making the world a better place, but really, how can we, lift up everybody's standard of living, and we just do it a little bit better? That would be terrific for me.
Yeah. I always like the idea that when countries are going to go to war, instead of making the soldiers fight, just make the two leaders who are deciding that we go to war, make them two fight it out.
Fewer wars. Probably a lot fewer wars.
Yeah. I think that'd be a better deal. Okay, so one of the things you do in the book is you talk about how business is a great tool for helping move us towards this, and you give some great. We just don't have the time to go into all of it, but you give some great examples of ways that businesses are doing some of this, and some ways they can continue doing this. But you also provide HR specifically with some great ideas. And you talk about some things that you've done and with your work at UKG and some things you've developed personally. Talk about life work cluster. Tell us what that is and how that works. Describe that for us.
Yeah, I think I had spoke to an audience some years back about a diversity issue, I think. And I could tell by reading the faces in the audience that it was resonating with some people, and some people were skeptical, and some people seemed even frustrated that I was talking about it. I'm like, what is this? What is this? Why is it that the same words land on people's ears differently? What is that? And then I started thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right. Like, what? These people are at different positions. So if I'm talking about an issue like diversity, and I walk into a room full of white males, and I say, we need to increase diversity. We need more women and people of color, blah, 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 blah. Some of those white males, if they're at a certain stage in their lives where they feel they're in survival mode, it's natural then for them to be like, no, I don't want to do any of that stuff. Right. Because you're trying to replace me. Right? If they feel threatened, it makes sense that they would respond that way. On the other hand, if you go to, other levels of this, I turn the hierarchy into a continuum, and I call it the employee continuum of needs. If you take somebody at the other end of that continuum, and they're thinking about their legacy, they're secure in who they are, they're trying to make an impact greater than them, and they are going to be more open to this idea. Like, sure, how do I learn from other people? We should bring some new perspectives. I want to hear some new perspectives. So that, helped me understand, look, people are at different stages of their lives. So regardless of what the policy or the program or initiative is we're trying to introduce in our organizations, it can't be a one size fits all approach. We got to touch people at the level that they're at based on this life work journey that they're on. And so it was instrumental for us as a lens in thinking about, our technologies and, how we might, are we covering, everybody? Are we meeting people where they are at all stages along this thing?
Yeah, I think it's a powerful tool. I'd really, especially my HR friends, I'd really recommend it to them to dig into that and check that part out.
Yeah.
I have just a couple more questions for you, then I know you've got to run. The first is, you talk in this book about reparations, and I know that is a hot topic for people, but I've always been, I don't know what the big issue is with reparations. First of all, we spend a ton of money in this country on all kinds of nonsense. I don't know why we don't just do reparations and take care of it. Talk a little bit about reparations, what it might look like, and why it's important. Just talk a little bit about reparations.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an emotional issue. And the good news is that I hear more and more people talking about it since, before I published the book, I didn't hear about it as much, but now you got a lot of states now, California, one of them, trying to figure this out. But if you just step back, we had, a couple hundred years of free labor by, Black people, free labor for their whole lives and their kids' lives and their kids' lives. And, that labor was used not just to pick cotton, but that labor was used to develop infrastructure in our country.
Yeah. Right.
So, and at one point we were promised reparations, 40 acre and a mule. It just never came to fruition. So, the concept of free labor, and we're still, some of the buildings that were built by slaves we're still using. I mean, I think, was it Georgetown and some other universities or, starting. So this is free labor that, so that's one way to think about it. This is just payment for, services that were provided that were never compensated. That's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is from a moral and ethical standpoint.
Right.
When you think about who we say we are and who we've been, and the fact that these gaps have grown, the wealth gap in America is it was like Black people owned about 1% of the wealth in America at the time slavery was abolished. Black people still own about 1 point something percent, because again, accumulate, that wealth accumulates, and there's compounding, associated with all that. So the other thing,
make no mistake, it's because of the wrongs that were done, not just during slavery, but over and over and over again. Yeah.
The compounding impact of it, like, redlining and housing, and being denied government loans for housing, when, you should have qualified for them, all that stuff. And the other thing too, is just as a society, how are we going to function as a society with these continuing disparities? Again, we're paying for it with crime. We're paying for it with poverty programs. We're paying for it on the back end. Why not be proactive and pay for this stuff up front? It's going to be a lot cheaper. All the economic analysis suggests it's going to be a lot cheaper. And we've offered reparations for other groups, for other things. It would be consistent, with who we have been. And again, just from a financial standpoint, it's cheaper for us to deal with this stuff right now. And the more we contemplate it and don't do anything, the more expensive it will become to finally do something about it. Again, because of compounding. It's really, if you want to throw the ethics and morals and the touchy-feely stuff all out of the window, it's almost like we can't afford not to do it.
Right.
So it's fascinating to me. And there are people who've done, statistical analysis to talk about what that number could look like. I have my own proposal about what to do. I don't say, just give somebody a check.
Right.
There's some things I think it should be used as a wealth building instrument, because wealth is where we're so far behind. So if you're buying a house, you're starting a business, I think some resources to help with that, particularly since we've been denied those resources in the past, I think is warranted.
Yeah. Well, it's an outstanding section of the book, and I think it's something people should definitely look at, especially if they want to get educated on it. It's outstanding.
Thank you.
Okay. My last question is, one of the things we like to do is get to know people better by the music that they enjoy. So, Dr. Conrad, just tell us what kind of music you like. What kind, maybe some of your favorite artists, songs, concerts. Tell us about the music that you enjoy.
Well, I'm an old soul. So I just happen to, by the time this airs, I'll be 51. So I got a birthday coming up. But when you look at my library, it's all 70s, 60s, and 70s music. So I couldn't name you 3 of the top 10 artists in any category today. I just don't even listen to the, regular stuff. I love, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Commodores, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Teddy Pendergrass. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I listen to. I like the Bee Gees. Kind of I like Creedence Clearwater Revival. I like Kenny. What's my guy's name? The Doobie Brothers.
Oh, Michael McDonald. I
like artists that could sing. Like if you turn off the music, and they can just sing, or if you don't have them sing and just listen to the music. So I like the artistry that the music, the instrumentation, was there, as well as the voices. So I want to hear the story. I want to feel like I just lost somebody after I listen to this,
Right.
So that's kind of who I am, man. I'm a throwback in that way.
I love it. That's good. You said something that made me think of something I wanted to ask, and then I just had a phone call that distracted me. Oh shoot. I don't want to go too long. I may have to edit this question.
Was it about the music, some of the artists?
Yes, it was about the music. You said, you're talking about Stevie Wonder. So Stevie Wonder is one of the greatest concerts I've ever been to. He's in my top 10 all-time concerts. I saw him play, and he played for 4 hours. It was insane. It was
hit after hit after hit after hit.
Oh my goodness. Well, he plays for 2 hours, and then he walks out and he's like taking a bow. And I thought it was over, and he goes, "We're going to take a little intermission. We'll be right back." And then he comes out and he played for 2 more hours. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life. It was so crazy.
I hadn't seen him. I got the chance to see so many people, and he's been on the list, and I hadn't had a chance to see him. And, he's getting older. He ain't going to be around forever.
Yeah.
And I would love to see him.
He was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Wow.
Dr. Conrad, thank you so much. The book is In Search of Humanity by Dr. Jarik Conrad. Tell them where they can contact you. I know you do speaking and all that kind of stuff. You'd be an outstanding consultant and resource for everybody. Tell them how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, or nowadays you just search my name, and all my stuff will pop up. For better or for worse, everything will pop up. The book is available at all the places where you get your books, Amazon, and all those online outlets. Look, I appreciate it. When you write a book, you just hope, you hope that people read it. And then when they read it, you hope that it makes them think. Like, they don't necessarily have to agree with everything that I say, but understand at least why I'm saying it, and then think, and you might have a better solution than I do. And I'm happy to, when people send me notes with, new ideas and stuff like that. But I hope it makes you think, and I hope you realize that it's coming from, a place of love, where I feel like, man, we could just be, our daily lives can be so much more rich if we had the ability to recognize that we're part of many tribes at the same time. But the most important one is that human tribe.
Yeah. Speaking of the human tribe, your website is humanlikeme.com, and you even have some apparel they can go and get the human like me stuff. Yeah.
I do. I'm bad on marketing it, but my dream is to have people from just different backgrounds and colors and races and shapes and sizes and ethnicities, all wearing something that says human like me.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Take care. Good luck with the podcast.
Thanks. What a great discussion with Dr. Jarik Conrad. I'm sure you got as much out of that as I did. Be sure to pick up his book, In Search of Humanity, and visit his website, humanlikeme.com. We are going to have a meditation in just a moment. But before we do, I would appreciate it if you would consider going out and rating and ranking and commenting on our podcast, wherever you listen to it. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you enjoy other episodes of The Mindful Leader, be sure to go out and rank that and leave those comments. That really helps people learn more about this podcast, and we really appreciate it. You can also go out to pendulumcoaching.com. That is our website. We have a weekly email newsletter that you can sign up for there. We just send a short newsletter out every week that just kind of gives you some leadership encouragement and things on mindfulness, emotional intelligence, leadership. I think you'll enjoy that. You can also invite me to come speak for your organization. I would be more than happy to do that. We have workshops, we have keynotes, all kinds of things we can do to help you out. Let's prepare ourselves for a meditation. As always, I like to say, if you are driving, please be safe and careful, and we appreciate that. Otherwise, you're probably sitting in a chair. It's good to place your feet on the ground, just to get grounded. You can place your hands in your lap, maybe your back up against the back of the chair. You can close your eyes if you like to. You don't have to, but it can kind of help you focus and concentrate. Or you might be laying on a recliner or a sofa or somewhere listening to this, and that's all fine. But I like to just take a few breaths to kind of relax ourselves and get into the idea of the meditation. Let's just inhale together and exhale and inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. You can continue to breathe normally. What a powerful interview. And one of the most important things that Dr. Conrad brought out was empathy, and how we need empathy if we are going to progress toward the best of humanity. Empathy is that idea of not only understanding the feelings of others, but also sharing those feelings. Really seeing people for who they are and what they're experiencing and what they have experienced and what they're going through now. Let's just take a moment for you to think about your own level of empathy. Do you just have empathy for those in your inner circle, those that you care the most about? Or does your empathy extend towards all people? Are there caveats to your empathy? Are you willing to have empathy for people as long as they meet a certain set of criteria in your mind? Or are you able to have empathy to understand and share the feelings of everyone? Think about where you are with empathy right now. Now I would like you to consider, what would it take for you to expand your empathy, to have an increased understanding of other people, and to increase your level of sharing the feelings of others? How would you go about increasing your empathy? One of the important aspects of empathy is that we don't stop with empathy. Understanding and sharing the feelings of others is important. As Dr. Conrad pointed out, empathy grows into compassion. And compassion is when we take action on the empathy that we have. We feel for others. We understand the suffering of others. But in what ways are we compassionate? What do we actionably do to alleviate the suffering of others? Take a few moments and think about your compassion. What are you doing to help alleviate the suffering of other people? If we are going to create a better humanity, it's obviously going to take more than what we as a society are doing now. Dr. Conrad talked about people who are on the sidelines, who aren't even in the game. But even for those of us who are already empathetic and compassionate, ask yourself, what more can you be doing to increase your compassion, to serve others more, to help alleviate the suffering of others more? Consider your own compassion and how you can increase that. Let's inhale together and exhale. And inhale and exhale. And one more time, inhale and exhale. You can open your eyes. I want to share with you my deep appreciation for you joining us on this episode of the Mindful Leader podcast as we search for humanity and a better humanity. Be sure to check out this book. It's full of great wisdom, information, history. It's just a great book. Why We Fight, How to Stop, and the Role Business Must Play in Searching for Humanity. Dr. Jarik Conrad. Be sure to check him out at humanlikeme.com. Be sure, if you enjoyed this episode and other episodes of the Mindful Leader podcast, to let others know about this podcast so they can enjoy it as well. We appreciate you doing that, and we will see you next time on The Mindful Leader.